You can stand in front of your bathroom mirror every single morning, repeating, "I deserve abundance," until your voice goes hoarse. But if there's a broken-hearted 7-year-old inside you whispering, "That's not true," guess whose voice the universe is actually hearing? It's not the confident adult saying affirmations for money. It's the wounded child who learned long ago that she wasn't worthy of good things, and she's been running your financial life ever since. This is why your money affirmations feel like lies rolling off your tongue. This is why abundance feels like a costume that doesn't fit. This is why every time you try to manifest wealth, something inside you hits the brakes so hard you can almost feel the spiritual whiplash. The mirror you're looking into isn't reflecting your true worth back to you. It's reflecting decades of conditioning that taught you to apologize for existing, let alone thriving. Louise Hay discovered this truth when she was healing from cancer in 1977. She realized that her body was holding on to every cruel message she'd absorbed about her value as a human being. The disease wasn't just attacking her cells, it was manifesting the self-hatred she'd carried since childhood. But here's what Louise understood that most people miss. You can't affirm your way out of unworthiness any more than you can put makeup over a broken bone and expect it to heal. Worthiness isn't something you create with words. It's something you uncover by removing the lies that buried it. Think of it like trying to see your reflection in a cracked mirror. You can say, "I see clearly" 1,000 times, but until you repair the cracks, the image will always be distorted. Your affirmations aren't working because you're trying to see abundance through the fractured lens of unworthiness, and fractured lenses can't reflect wholeness. I want you to know that the woman who discovered she was worth $843,000 after doing this inner work started exactly where you are right now. She'd tried every manifestation technique, bought every course, said every affirmation in the book. But nothing stuck because underneath all those beautiful words was a foundational belief that she was fundamentally flawed. The money couldn't land because there was no worthy ground for it to root in. The link in the first pinned comment below is where our community gathers to do the deeper work that makes affirmations finally stick. This is where we learn to see ourselves through the eyes of unconditional love, where daily affirmations are sent with the tenderness your inner child has been craving. Because healing unworthiness isn't a solo journey, and you deserve witnesses to your transformation. But here's the secret that will change everything about how you approach abundance. Your unworthiness isn't a character defect that needs to be fixed. It's a protection mechanism that needs to be gently dismantled. That broken-hearted child inside you isn't sabotaging your success because she's mean or stupid. She's keeping you small because someone taught her that big dreams lead to big disappointments, and she's been protecting you from pain the only way she knows how. The most heartbreaking thing about unworthiness is how intelligent it is. Your psyche didn't randomly decide you weren't good enough. It collected evidence from a world that sometimes forgot to see your magnificence, and it built an entire identity around keeping you safe from future rejection. Every time your father was too tired to praise your drawing, every time your mother compared you to your seemingly perfect sister, every time a teacher overlooked your raised hand, your inner child took notes. And those notes became the blueprint for your adult relationship with receiving. This is why affirmations can feel so triggering when you first start saying them. You're literally contradicting a survival system that's been in place for decades. When you say, "I deserve wealth," something inside you immediately starts providing contrary evidence. Remember when you were passed over for that promotion? Remember when your ex said you were too much? Remember when your family made you feel guilty for wanting more than they had? The inner critic doesn't argue with your affirmations because it's cruel. It argues because it genuinely believes it's saving you from devastation. But here's what that protective part of you doesn't understand. You're no longer that vulnerable child who needed to read every room and shrink to fit. You're a grown woman with the power to choose different thoughts, different beliefs, different responses to old triggers. The evidence your unworthiness collected was real, but it was never the whole truth. For every rejection you experienced, there were moments of acceptance you might not have noticed because you weren't looking for them. For every criticism that landed, there were compliments that bounced off because they didn't match your existing story about yourself. Your nervous system learned to scan for danger, for signs that you weren't welcome, for proof that you needed to work harder to earn love. This hypervigilance served you when you were small and powerless. But now it's like having a security system that's so sensitive, it goes off when a butterfly lands on your window. Every opportunity for abundance triggers the alarm. Danger! You don't belong here! You'll be found out! You'll be rejected! The body keeps score of every moment you felt unseen, unheard, unvalued. Your shoulders carry the weight of trying to be perfect enough to finally earn approval. Your jaw holds the tension of biting back your truth because speaking up felt dangerous. Your stomach churns with the anxiety of waiting for the other shoe to drop because good things never last for people like you. This is why you can say, "I am worthy of wealth," while your entire physical system is broadcasting the opposite message. Money affirmations fail because they're trying to override a deeply embodied belief system. It's like trying to convince someone they're safe while they're standing in a burning building. The words might be true in theory, but the environment doesn't support the reality. Your inner environment is still organized around scarcity, around proving worth instead of knowing it, around earning love instead of receiving it freely. This conditioning runs so deep that most people don't even recognize it as conditioning. They think unworthiness is just their personality, just the way they're wired, just reality. But Louise Hay proved that these patterns can be completely transformed when you approach them with the right combination of tenderness and determination. She healed her cancer by healing her relationship with herself, and in doing so, she opened pathways to abundance that had been blocked for decades. The truth your affirmations are trying to reach is already there, buried under layers of other people's judgments and your own internalized criticism. Worthiness isn't something you develop. It's something you remember. It's not something you earn. It's something you are. But remembering requires us to gently challenge every story that taught you otherwise. Imagine for a moment that your sense of self-worth is like an antique mirror that's been passed down through generations. When you were born, this mirror was pristine, reflecting back your inherent perfection, your natural deservingness, your uncomplicated relationship with receiving love. But as you moved through childhood, small cracks began to appear. The first crack might have formed when you were 3 years old, and your mother was too exhausted to celebrate your excitement about a butterfly you'd found. Another crack appeared at 5, when your father said, "Stop being so dramatic," when you cried over a scraped knee. Each dismissal, each comparison, each moment when your authentic self wasn't met with delight, created another hairline fracture in your internal mirror. By the time you were 7 or 8, the reflection looking back at you was fragmented, distorted, telling you a story about your worth that had nothing to do with your actual value and everything to do with other people's capacity to see you clearly in that moment. But here's the devastating part. You believed the cracked mirror more than you believed your own inherent magnificence. That broken reflection became your truth. It told you that love was conditional, that you had to perform to be valuable, that your natural desires were too much, too greedy, too selfish. It convinced you that other people somehow got the memo about how to be worthy while you were absent that day. The mirror whispered that abundance was for other people, people who were somehow more deserving, more talented, more lovable than you could ever be. This is why Bethany, a marketing executive from Denver, could recite prosperity affirmations for 2 years without seeing a single shift in her financial reality. She'd wake up every morning, look in her bathroom mirror, and declare, "I am a magnet for wealth and success." But the cracked mirror of her self-worth was showing her the reflection of a woman whose father had called her expensive every time she asked for anything as a child. The mirror reflected back the teenager whose mother had sighed heavily whenever she needed school supplies, making her feel guilty for having needs at all. Bethany's affirmations were bouncing off the surface of her conditioning like water off glass. The words couldn't penetrate because underneath them was a foundational belief that she was a burden, that her desires cost too much, that asking for abundance was somehow selfish or wrong. Her nervous system had been trained to expect scarcity, to apologize for wanting, to make herself smaller so she wouldn't inconvenience anyone with her needs. The cracks in your internal mirror aren't random. They form patterns that tell the story of how you learn to diminish yourself. Some women develop horizontal cracks across their worthiness, believing they're fundamentally flawed in ways that can't be fixed. Others have vertical fractures that split their identity between who they really are and who they think they need to be to earn love. Still others have spider web patterns radiating from a central wound, usually formed around age 5 or 6 when their innocent trust met the world's inability to consistently honor their tender heart. Louise Hay understood that healing begins with recognizing these patterns without judgment. The cracks aren't evidence of weakness. They're evidence of a sensitive soul trying to survive in a world that doesn't always know how to nurture sensitivity. Every fracture represents a moment when you were more open, more trusting, more vulnerable than the environment could safely hold. Your unworthiness is actually proof of how deeply you've always been able to love, because only someone with a profound capacity for connection could be so wounded by disconnection. When you understand this, your whole relationship with your inner critic begins to shift. Instead of seeing unworthiness as an enemy to defeat, you begin to see it as a young part of yourself that learned to expect rejection and developed an elaborate system to avoid it. This part isn't trying to sabotage your success. It's trying to save you from the pain it believes success will inevitably bring. The healing begins when you can look into that cracked mirror with compassion instead of criticism, when you can see the wounded child behind your adult anxiety about money and success. This is the work Louise Hay called mirror work, and it's the foundation of every lasting transformation. But most people do mirror work backwards. They try to convince themselves they're worthy while still believing they're not. They force affirmations over their pain instead of tending to the pain first. Real mirror work starts with radical honesty about what you actually see when you look at yourself. Not what you want to see, not what you think you should see, but what's actually reflected back in this moment. For most women, that reflection includes shame about their desires, guilt about their ambition, fear that they're asking for too much, anxiety that they'll be rejected if they shine too brightly. And this is exactly where the healing needs to begin. Place your hand gently on your heart and take 3 slow, deep breaths. Let your breathing soften any tension you're carrying in your chest, in your shoulders, in your jaw. Now imagine you're looking into a mirror, but instead of seeing yourself as you are now, you're seeing yourself as a 7-year-old child. Look into those young eyes with all the tenderness you would show any child who was hurting, any child who had been taught to question her own worth. Speak to this child the way you wish someone had spoken to you when these wounds were fresh. Sweet one, I see how hard you've been trying to be good enough, smart enough, helpful enough to earn love. I see how you learned to make yourself smaller when your bigness felt like too much for the grown-ups around you. I see how you decided that wanting was dangerous because disappointment hurt so deeply. And I want you to know that none of that was your fault. You were never too much. You were never not enough. You were perfect exactly as you were, and you're perfect exactly as you are now. Let yourself feel whatever arises as you offer this tenderness to your inner child. Maybe there are tears for all the years she's been waiting to hear these words. Maybe there's anger at the people who should have seen your worth but couldn't because they'd never been taught to see their own. Maybe there's relief that someone finally understands the impossible bind you were put in. Be yourself but not too much. Want things, but don't be greedy. Shine, but don't outshine anyone else. Now imagine yourself at 7 years old hearing the most healing affirmation possible. You get to change your mind about your worth. You get to decide that the people who couldn't see your value were working with broken mirrors of their own. You get to choose to believe that your desires matter, that your dreams are valid, that abundance is your birthright simply because you exist. You get to forgive yourself for believing you weren't enough because you were doing the best you could with the information you had. This is the affirmation that changes everything. I forgive myself for believing I wasn't worthy. I choose to remember the truth of who I am. When you can offer this forgiveness to yourself, when you can separate your worth from other people's capacity to recognize it, the cracks in your internal mirror begin to fill with golden light. Like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, your healed wounds become the most beautiful part of your story. Miranda, a teacher from Portland, practiced this forgiveness work for 21 days straight. She'd had money affirmations written on sticky notes all over her apartment for months, but they felt hollow, like she was lying to herself. When she started speaking to her inner 7-year-old with genuine tenderness, everything shifted. She wasn't trying to convince herself she was worthy anymore. She was remembering that she always had been. The broken places in her heart weren't flaws to hide. They were sacred scars that proved how much love she contained. Understanding where unworthiness was born doesn't require you to excavate every painful memory or rehash every moment of childhood disappointment. But it does ask you to recognize that your relationship with receiving began long before you ever thought about money or success. It began in the earliest moments of your life, when you were learning whether the world was a safe place to have needs, to want things, to take up space with your joy and your sadness and your magnificent, messy humanity. For most women, the seeds of financial unworthiness were planted in seemingly innocent interactions. Maybe your mother would stiffen slightly whenever you asked for something, sending the unconscious message that your desires created burden. Maybe your father would respond to your excitement about your dreams with practical concerns about money, teaching you that wanting was dangerous because resources were scarce. Maybe you watched your parents argue about finances and decided that money caused pain, that it was safer to want less than to risk the conflict that seemed to come with abundance. Priya, a software developer from Austin, traced her money blocks back to being 8 years old and overhearing her grandmother tell her mother that Priya was getting expensive because she'd outgrown her shoes again. That innocent comment landed in Priya's psyche as evidence that her growth, her expansion, her very existence was a financial burden to the people who were supposed to love her unconditionally. From that moment forward, she unconsciously made herself smaller in every way she could, choosing the cheapest options, diminishing her accomplishments, refusing opportunities that felt too good for someone like her. The child's mind doesn't understand nuance. It hears, "You're expensive," and translates it as, "You cost too much," which becomes, "You're too much," which becomes, "You don't deserve abundance." This is how family patterns get passed down through generations. Your grandmother might have learned that resources were scarce during the Depression. Your mother might have inherited that scarcity mindset and expressed it through anxiety about spending. You absorbed that anxiety and made it mean something about your personal worth. But here's what your child mind couldn't comprehend in those moments. The adults around you were doing their best with their own unhealed wounds around worthiness and abundance. Your father's concerns about money weren't really about money. They were about his own fear of not being enough to provide for his family. Your mother's discomfort with your desires wasn't about your desires. It was about her own unmet needs from childhood that she'd never learned to tend. The people who shaped your early beliefs about worth and abundance were passing down their own inherited limitations. This doesn't excuse harmful messages or minimize their impact, but it does offer a pathway to freedom. When you can see that your unworthiness isn't actually about you, that it's about broken systems and inherited trauma and adults who never learned to value themselves properly, you can begin to separate your true identity from the stories you absorbed. You can begin to question whether the messages you received about your worth were accurate reflections of reality or simply echoes of other people's pain. Dylan, a graphic designer from Seattle, discovered that her terror of financial success was rooted in watching her mother become bitter and resentful after her father's business thrived. Her mother would make cutting comments about rich people, suggesting that wealth made people selfish and mean. Dylan unconsciously absorbed the belief that choosing abundance meant choosing to be unlikable, that she had to choose between money and love. This belief kept her undercharging for her services for years until she realized she was trying to stay lovable by staying broke. The child who learned to associate money with conflict, abundance with burden, success with separation, doesn't need to be convinced that these associations are wrong. She needs to be held with tender understanding while she learns that safety and abundance can coexist, that love and success aren't mutually exclusive, that her worth isn't determined by how little space she takes up in the world. Every family has its own mythology around money and worthiness, its own spoken and unspoken rules about who gets to want what and how much is too much. Some families teach that struggle is noble, that easy money is suspicious, that you have to work harder than everyone else to prove you deserve what you have. Others pass down beliefs that abundance is finite, that someone else's success means less for you, that dreaming big is setting yourself up for disappointment. These family mythologies aren't just ideas, they're embodied patterns that live in your nervous system, that shape how you move through the world, that determine what opportunities you can even see, let alone pursue. Healing unworthiness requires gently challenging these inherited beliefs and choosing new ones that actually serve your highest good. The deepest healing work happens when you learn to reparent the wounded child who still lives inside your adult body, still making financial decisions from a place of old fear and inherited limitation. This inner child has been waiting decades for someone to see her clearly, to validate her worth, to give her permission to want big, beautiful things without apologizing for her desires. That someone is you, and the time is now. Reparenting doesn't mean dismissing your childhood experiences or pretending they didn't matter. It means becoming the loving, supportive adult that your inner child needed then and still needs now. It means learning to speak to yourself with the tenderness you would show any hurting child, offering the encouragement and validation that maybe weren't available when you first needed them. When 7-year-old you learned that asking for things created tension in your family, she needed an adult to say, "Your wants and needs matter. It's normal and healthy for children to have desires. You're not responsible for adult stress about money." When teenage you felt guilty about the cost of your education or your activities, she needed to hear, "Investing in your growth and dreams is a joy, not a burden. You deserve resources. Your potential is worth nurturing." The beautiful truth about reparenting is that it's never too late. Your inner child isn't trapped in the past. She's present with you in every moment, listening to how you talk to yourself, watching how you treat your dreams, feeling whether you truly believe you deserve good things. Every time you choose self-compassion over self-criticism, every time you honor your desires instead of minimizing them, every time you receive compliments or opportunities without immediately deflecting them, you're giving that inner child the love and validation she's always deserved. Zara, a massage therapist from Miami, started practicing what she called inner child abundance work after realizing that her money anxiety always spiked when she thought about raising her rates. She would literally feel like a small child asking for permission to want more, expecting to be told she was being greedy or ungrateful. Instead of forcing herself to charge more from this wounded place, she began having daily conversations with her inner 8-year-old, the age when she remembered her parents fighting about money for the first time. She would place her hand on her heart and speak directly to that frightened child. "Sweet one, I know you learned that money causes problems and that wanting more feels dangerous. But I want you to know that we're safe now. We're not going to lose love by honoring our worth. We're not going to cause conflict by charging what our work is actually worth. You don't have to protect us by keeping us small anymore." Within 3 months, Zara had doubled her rates and her income, not from a place of forcing or pushing, but from a genuine feeling of deserving what she was asking for. The cracked mirror of your self-worth begins to heal every time you treat yourself with unconditional love. Every act of self-compassion is like applying golden repair to the fractures, strengthening your reflection with something more beautiful than what was there before. You're not trying to return to some original perfect state. You're creating something new, something that honors both your wounds and your resilience, something that transforms your sensitivity from a liability into a superpower. As you practice this reparenting work, you might notice that your inner child has very specific needs around money and abundance. Maybe she needs to know that it's safe to want beautiful things without being judged as superficial. Maybe she needs permission to receive help and support without having to earn it through suffering. Maybe she needs to understand that abundance doesn't make you a bad person, that success doesn't separate you from love, that choosing prosperity is actually a way of honoring the dreams she's carried all these years. The conversation between your adult self and your inner child becomes the foundation of everything that follows. When your child feels genuinely seen, heard, and loved, she stops sabotaging your success because she no longer needs to protect you from imagined dangers. When she trusts that you'll tend to her fears with kindness instead of dismissal, she becomes your greatest ally in creating the abundant life you both deserve. This inner relationship is where your affirmations finally find fertile ground. Instead of trying to convince a terrified child that she deserves abundance, you're speaking words of worth to a beloved part of yourself who finally feels safe enough to believe them. The affirmations aren't trying to override anything anymore. They're simply reflecting back a truth that your whole system is ready to embrace. Now comes the part that separates real transformation from temporary inspiration. The 21 days when your nervous system learns to embody worthiness instead of just thinking about it intellectually. This isn't about perfection or never having another self-doubting thought. It's about building new neural pathways that make self-love the default instead of self-criticism, that make abundance feel natural instead of foreign, that make receiving feel safe instead of scary. The first 7 days are often the most disorienting because you're literally rewiring patterns that have been in place for decades. Your brain might feel confused, like it's trying to navigate familiar streets that have suddenly been rearranged. You might catch yourself reaching for old stories about your limitations, only to remember that you're choosing different thoughts now. This confusion isn't a sign that the work isn't working. It's evidence that change is happening at the most fundamental level. During this first week, you might notice your body releasing old emotional energy in unexpected ways. Maybe you cry during movies that never affected you before, or feel angry about situations from years past, or experience sudden waves of sadness that seem to come from nowhere. This is your system clearing out stored feelings that were too big to process when they first arose. Trust this release. Your body is making space for new experiences, new beliefs, new levels of abundance that couldn't land while you were still carrying the old emotional residue. Days 8 through 14 often bring the strongest resistance because this is when your ego realizes that something fundamental is shifting. Every outdated belief system has a built-in survival mechanism that will try to pull you back to familiar patterns when it senses threat. Your unworthiness isn't just going to quietly disappear. It's going to present you with evidence of why you should return to playing small, why wanting more is dangerous, why you were safer when you expected less. This is when you might suddenly notice every rejection from your past, every time someone questioned your worth, every moment when you felt like you didn't belong. Your mind might start serving up a highlight reel of every mistake you've ever made, every time you failed to meet someone else's expectations, every reason why you're not qualified for the abundance you're claiming. This isn't happening because you're doing the work wrong. It's happening because you're doing it right. The old programming is fighting for its life. Kimberly, a real estate agent from Phoenix, almost quit her worthiness work on day 10 when she suddenly remembered every awkward thing she'd said in high school and became convinced that these decades-old embarrassments proved she didn't deserve success. Her inner critic was working overtime, trying to convince her that someone who had once tripped in front of the entire cafeteria clearly wasn't cut out for prosperity. But instead of believing these thoughts, she recognized them as the old system's desperate attempt to maintain control. This is where your commitment to yourself becomes everything. Not commitment to being positive or perfect, but commitment to treating yourself with consistent kindness, even when your brain is offering you every reason to return to self-attack. Every time you catch yourself spiraling into old stories and choose compassion instead, you're literally building new neural pathways. Every time you respond to your inner critic with gentleness instead of agreement, you're teaching your system that love is stronger than fear. The third week, days 15 through 21, is often when the magic starts to feel real instead of forced. Your new thoughts about your worth begin to feel familiar instead of foreign. Abundance affirmations start rolling off your tongue with genuine conviction instead of hope. You find yourself naturally making choices that honor your value, saying no to opportunities that don't serve you, asking for what you're worth without apologizing, receiving compliments without immediately deflecting them. But even during this integration phase, expect resistance to show up in subtler forms. You might find yourself sabotaging opportunities just before they fully manifest, or creating drama to distract from your success, or suddenly becoming worried about what other people will think if you actually thrive. These aren't signs of failure, they're normal parts of the process. Your system is learning to tolerate increasing levels of goodness, and sometimes it needs to test the boundaries to make sure this new reality is actually safe. Remember that resistance isn't your enemy. It's information. Every fear that arises, every doubt that surfaces, every moment of old programming is showing you exactly where your healing work needs to go next. Instead of judging these responses, you can thank them for protecting you all these years and let them know that you're choosing a different kind of safety now, safety that comes from knowing your worth instead of hiding it. 3 weeks into this work, something profound begins to shift in how you move through the world. The changes aren't always dramatic or obvious to outside observers, but internally, you start to notice a fundamental difference in how you relate to yourself and your possibilities. It's like you've been holding your breath your entire life and finally remembered how to exhale. The first sign that your worthiness work is taking root often shows up in your body language. You might catch yourself standing taller without consciously deciding to do so, or notice that your voice has more presence when you speak, or find that you're making eye contact more easily with strangers and acquaintances. Your nervous system is beginning to broadcast a different message about your place in the world, and people are unconsciously responding to this shift in energy. Jasmine, a freelance writer from Chicago, realized something had fundamentally changed when she walked into a coffee shop and the barista immediately smiled at her, even though they'd never met before. She'd always assumed she was invisible to service workers, someone who blended into the background and went unnoticed. But as her internal sense of worth strengthened, her external presence shifted too. She wasn't performing confidence or forcing herself to take up space. She was simply occupying her rightful place in the world with quiet ease. Another early indicator that your inner work is manifesting external change is how differently you respond to opportunities and invitations. Instead of automatically assuming you're not qualified or that someone else would be a better choice, you find yourself naturally considering whether an opportunity aligns with your values and desires. The question shifts from, "Am I good enough for this?" to, "Is this good enough for me?" This isn't arrogance. It's healthy discernment based on genuine self-respect. You might notice that you're no longer apologizing for taking up space, for having opinions, for wanting things that matter to you. The constant internal commentary about whether you're being too much or asking for too much begins to quiet down, replaced by a steadier internal voice that simply assumes your worth instead of constantly questioning it. Your energy isn't being drained by the exhausting work of justifying your existence. It's available for creating, dreaming, and manifesting. The mirror you look into each morning begins reflecting back someone you actually recognize instead of a stranger you're trying to convince of her own value. The cracks aren't gone, but they've been filled with something golden and strong, creating a reflection that's more interesting and beautiful than anything perfectly uniform could ever be. You start to see your sensitivity as a gift rather than a weakness, your big dreams as natural expressions of your soul rather than evidence of selfishness or unrealistic expectations. Around this time, external validation often begins appearing in unexpected ways, not because you need it anymore, but because you're finally energetically available to receive it. Compliments that would have bounced off your armor of unworthiness now land softly in your heart. Opportunities that you would have talked yourself out of considering now feel approachable and possible. Money that would have felt too good to be true now flows with less resistance because you're no longer unconsciously deflecting it. Naomi, a yoga instructor from San Francisco, started receiving unexpected clients during her 4th week of worthiness work, not because she was marketing differently or offering new services, but because something in her energy had shifted. She was no longer desperate for validation or apologetic about her rates. She was simply present to serve from a place of genuine self-respect, and people could feel the difference. Her business doubled within 2 months, not from hustling harder, but from finally allowing herself to receive what she'd always been worthy of. Your relationship with money itself begins to transform during this phase. Instead of feeling anxious or guilty when good things happen financially, You start to feel a quiet sense of rightness, as if abundance is finally finding its way to someone who knows how to receive it gracefully. You're no longer shocked when checks arrive on time, when unexpected money appears, when opportunities present themselves. These things start feeling natural rather than miraculous. The internal shift is often so gradual that you don't notice it happening until you catch yourself responding differently to a situation that would have triggered your old worthiness wounds. Maybe someone questions your prices, and instead of immediately doubting yourself, you feel curious about why they're not a good fit for your services. Maybe you receive a compliment, and instead of deflecting it with humor or self-deprecation, you simply say thank you and let it nourish you. Maybe you want something beautiful and expensive, and instead of feeling guilty about the desire, you start planning how to call it into your life. The transformation becomes undeniable when you realize that your entire relationship with receiving has fundamentally changed. This shift often crystallizes through a specific moment, a particular experience that makes it clear that you're no longer the same person who started this journey 21 days ago. For many women, this moment involves money or opportunity flowing to them in a way that feels both surprising and completely natural. Consider what happened to Valentina, a photographer from Portland who had been struggling to book clients for over 2 years. She'd tried every marketing strategy, posted consistently on social media, and even lowered her prices to try to attract more business. Nothing seemed to work, and she was beginning to wonder if photography was really meant to be her career. Then she stumbled across Louise Hay's teachings about worthiness and recognized herself in every description of women who felt undeserving of abundance. Valentina had grown up as the middle child in a family where money was constantly tight and her artistic interests were seen as impractical luxuries. Her father would roll his eyes when she asked for art supplies, and her mother would sigh heavily whenever Valentina expressed excitement about creative projects. By the time she was 12, Valentina had internalized the message that her creative gifts were burdens rather than blessings, that pursuing art was selfish when there were more practical ways to contribute to the family. As an adult, Valentina carried these beliefs into her business without even realizing it. She would photograph gorgeous weddings and then immediately discount her work in her mind, convincing herself that she was lucky anyone hired her at all. She would edit photos for hours beyond what she was being paid for because she felt guilty charging what her work was actually worth. She treated her business like a hobby that occasionally made money rather than a valuable service that deserved fair compensation. When Valentina began working with her inner child around worthiness, she started having conversations with the 12-year-old who had learned to hide her creative light. She began speaking to that young artist with the encouragement and support she had desperately needed but never received. Instead of forcing herself to market more aggressively, she focused on healing the part of herself that felt wrong for wanting to be paid well for creative work. During the second week of her worthiness practice, something remarkable happened. Valentina was walking through a park when a woman approached her and asked if she was a photographer. The woman had noticed Valentina's camera and wondered if she might be available to photograph her daughter's wedding in 3 months. Not only was the woman offering exactly the kind of high-end wedding work Valentina had been dreaming of, but she mentioned a budget that was triple what Valentina had been charging. Instead of immediately offering to work for less money or apologizing for her lack of availability, Valentina felt a calm certainty settle in her chest. She exchanged contact information, went home, and created a proposal that honored both her artistic vision and her financial worth. The client accepted immediately and referred 3 friends within the following month. Valentina's business transformed not because she learned new marketing techniques, but because she finally believed she deserved to be well compensated for work that brought joy to others. The shift Valentina experienced represents something much deeper than a business breakthrough. When you heal unworthiness at its root, you stop energetically pushing away the very things you're consciously trying to attract. You stop sabotaging opportunities before they fully manifest. You stop apologizing for your gifts and start celebrating them. You stop hiding your light and start letting it shine bright enough to attract the people and situations that are meant for you. This is why affirmations finally start working after you've done the inner work. They're no longer contradicting a fundamental belief in your unworthiness. They're simply reflecting back a truth that your whole system finally recognizes. When Valentina says, "I am worthy of abundant compensation for my artistic gifts," every cell in her body agrees, instead of arguing. Her nervous system relaxes into receiving instead of tensing against it. The secret that changes everything about manifestation is understanding that worthiness isn't something you achieve through positive thinking or perfect behavior. It's something you uncover by removing the layers of conditioning that convinced you it wasn't already yours. Every human being is born inherently worthy of love, abundance, joy, and success. The work isn't creating worthiness from nothing. It's remembering what was always true and releasing what never was. As we reach the completion of this journey together, I want you to understand that the mirror you've been looking into throughout your life is finally clear. The cracks that distorted your reflection for so many years have been filled with golden understanding, with compassion for the child who learned to doubt her worth, with forgiveness for the adults who couldn't see your value clearly because they'd never learned to see their own. The woman looking back at you now knows something that the woman who began listening to this message might not have fully grasped yet. Your affirmations weren't failing because you weren't saying them correctly or frequently enough. They were failing because they were trying to plant seeds of abundance in soil that had been poisoned by decades of unworthiness conditioning. But you've spent these past 60 minutes learning to heal that soil, to neutralize the toxins of old shame and inherited limitation, to create fertile ground where prosperity affirmations can finally take root and flourish. Louise Hay discovered this truth during her own healing journey in the 1970s and 80s, and it became the foundation of everything she taught for the rest of her life. She realized that lasting change doesn't happen through force or repetition, but through love. Not love as a pretty concept, but love as a practical tool for transformation. Love as the antidote to every form of self-rejection. Love as the key that unlocks abundance at every level. Your worthiness isn't conditional on your performance, your achievements, your ability to make other people comfortable, or your success at meeting impossible standards. It's woven into the fabric of your existence. It's as natural and unchangeable as your need for breath, as fundamental as your heartbeat. The people who taught you to question this truth weren't evil or intentionally cruel. They were passing down patterns they had inherited from their own wounded childhoods, their own unhealed relationships with worth and abundance. But this inheritance stops with you. Every time you choose self-compassion over self-criticism, every time you receive a compliment without deflecting it, every time you honor your desires instead of minimizing them, you're not just healing your own relationship with worthiness. You're healing the pattern for everyone who comes after you. Your children, your nieces and nephews, your students and colleagues, everyone whose life you touch will benefit from the inner work you've done to remember your inherent value. The community that gathers in our Ko-fi circle understands this ripple effect of worthiness healing. When you join us through the link in the pinned comment below, you're not just investing in your own transformation. You're contributing to a collective shift where women remember that they don't have to earn love, abundance, or success through suffering, perfectionism, or self-sacrifice. You're receiving daily affirmations that land in already fertile soil, guided meditations that help you maintain this new relationship with yourself, and the support of others who are walking this path of radical self-acceptance. As you integrate everything you've discovered during our time together, remember that healing unworthiness is not a destination you arrive at once and never have to visit again. It's an ongoing practice of choosing love over fear, expansion over contraction, receiving over deflecting. There will be days when the old programming tries to reassert itself, when unexpected triggers surface old feelings of not being good enough. This is normal and expected, not evidence of failure. When those moments arise, return to the mirror work we've explored together. Look into your own eyes with the tenderness you would show any beloved child. Speak to yourself with the kindness you've always deserved but maybe didn't always receive. Remember that the broken places in your story aren't flaws to hide. They're sacred scars that prove your incredible capacity to survive, to heal, to transform limitation into liberation. You who have listened to this entire message, you who have been willing to examine your relationship with worthiness and abundance, You who have allowed yourself to feel the full spectrum of emotions that arise when we touch these tender places. You are no longer the same person who pressed play an hour ago. Something fundamental has shifted in how you see yourself, how you relate to your desires, how you understand your place in a universe that is genuinely abundant enough for everyone to thrive. Subscribe to this channel to continue receiving the support and guidance that will help you maintain this new relationship with yourself. Let these teachings be a lighthouse when old storms of unworthiness try to pull you off course. Let Louise Hay's wisdom remind you again and again that love is always the answer, that you are always enough, that you always were and always will be worthy of every beautiful thing your heart desires. Your affirmations will work now because they're falling on the fertile soil of genuine self-love. Your manifestations will flow more easily because you're no longer energetically pushing them away. Your life will expand because you finally have permission to receive all the goodness that's been waiting for you to feel worthy of it. You always were worthy. You always deserved abundance. You always mattered. The only thing that's changed is that now you know it too. And knowing this truth, believing this truth, living from this truth changes everything. The mirror is clear, the reflection is beautiful, and the woman looking back at you is ready to receive all the love and abundance that have been yours from the very beginning. You always deserved it all.